The paddle cuts through turquoise water, each stroke bringing John Allen Shaw closer to a world untouched by time. His kayak, a small yellow vessel loaded with waterproof cases, rides the swells of the Indian Ocean like a fragile prayer. Above him, seabirds circle, their cries the only sound besides his rhythmic breathing and the slap of waves against fiberglass. He's been planning this moment for 3 years. Every stroke is deliberate, practiced in lakes back home in Washington state, but no amount of training prepared him for the weight of what he's about to do. In his mind, he rehearses phrases in languages he studied, Hindi, Tamil, knowing full well they'll be useless here. The Sentinelese speaks something older, something that predates the Tower of Babel itself, or so he's written in his journal. Through the morning mist, the island materializes like a photograph developing in solution. Dense jungle rises from bone-white beaches. Somewhere in that green fortress live people who have never seen a smartphone, never tasted chocolate, never heard a Beatles song. They exist in a bubble of human history that should have burst millennia ago but somehow persists. John's heart hammers against his ribcage. This is it, the culmination of missionary dreams, adventure fantasies, and something deeper he can't quite name. Perhaps it's the same impulse that drove explorers to plant flags on Antarctic ice, astronauts to walk on lunar dust. The need to go where no one has gone, to bridge the unbridgeable. The shore is close now. He can see figures moving between the trees. The internet's last mystery. In the age of satellites and surveillance, North Sentinel Island remains a black hole in our connected world. Google Earth shows it clearly a smudge of green in the Bay of Bengal, but zoom in and the resolution blurs deliberately. The Indian government ensures that even our digital eyes cannot penetrate its secrets. Online, the island has become mythology. Reddit threads spiral into conspiracy theories, secret government installations, buried treasure, portals to other dimensions. YouTube documentaries rack up millions of views, their thumbnails showing threatening figures on beaches, arrows frozen mid-flight in grainy photographs. Instagram accounts curate every scrap of information, turning tragedy into content, isolation into entertainment. There's something about the Sentinelese that captures our collective imagination in 2025. We live in an era where artificial intelligence writes our emails, where we can video call someone on the International Space Station, where nothing seems truly unknown anymore. Yet here, just a few hundred miles from mainland India, exists a community that has rejected everything we consider progress. They have no interest in our technology, our medicine, our beliefs. They don't want our help, our friendship, or our salvation. In a world obsessed with growth, connection, and expansion, the Sentinelese have chosen something radical: isolation. But this fascination reveals more about us than them. Our obsession with the uncontacted stems from the same colonial impulse that drove explorers to plant flags on discovered lands. We cannot accept that some doors should remain closed, that some stories aren't ours to tell, that some people have the right to be left alone. The internet doesn't respect boundaries, neither did John. The first migration. Imagine Earth 60,000 years ago. Ice sheets miles thick cover the northern continents. Mammoths roam frozen grasslands. Sea levels sit 400 feet lower than today, exposing vast coastal plains now drowned beneath oceans. A group of early humans, perhaps 50 individuals, makes a decision that will echo through millennia. They're leaving Africa, following game trails and seasonal patterns eastward. They're not explorers in any romantic sense. They're survivors, following food, seeking shelter, adapting to new environments with the ingenuity that defines our species. These aren't the first humans to migrate, but they're pioneering a route that will lead them across what we now call Asia. They traverse landscapes that no longer exist: land bridges connecting islands, river valleys now submerged, forests drowned beneath the Indian Ocean. They're remarkably capable. They've mastered fire, developed sophisticated tools, created languages complex enough to share knowledge across generations. They build rafts from logs and vines, navigating between islands when walking becomes impossible. Each generation pushes a little farther, colonizing new territories, adapting to new ecosystems. Eventually, some reach an archipelago in the Bay of Bengal. The islands are lush, filled with game and edible plants. The surrounding waters teem with fish. It's paradise compared to the harsh environments they've traversed. Then the ice melts. Over thousands of years, sea levels rise, the land bridges disappear, the archipelago fragments. What was once a vast connected landscape becomes isolated islands scattered across empty ocean. One group finds themselves on a single island, roughly 8 square kilometers of jungle and reef. They don't know it yet, but they've just become the most isolated human community on Earth. The genetic time capsule. Dr. Kumarsamy Thangaraj holds a vial containing something extraordinary. Genetic material from the Jarawa tribe, neighbors to the Sentinelese. Under laboratory lights in Hyderabad, he and his team have been sequencing DNA, searching for clues about humanity's oldest continuously isolated population. What they found is remarkable. The Andamanese tribes carry genetic variants found nowhere else on Earth, mutations that arose after their ancestors split from other human populations somewhere between 25 and 42,000 years ago. They're not just isolated culturally. They're isolated genetically, a living time capsule of early human diversity. The Sentinelese, though unstudied directly, likely carry these same unique markers. They represent an evolutionary branch that diverged before agriculture, before written language, before everything we consider civilization. Their genes might hold answers to questions we haven't learned to ask yet about disease resistance, adaptation, human variation. But this uniqueness makes them vulnerable. With possibly fewer than 100 individuals, the Sentinelese face the genetic challenges of any small population: limited diversity, increased risk of inherited disorders, vulnerability to inbreeding. Every death shrinks their gene pool further. More immediately dangerous are pathogens. The Sentinelese immune system has never encountered measles, influenza, or even the common cold. Diseases that cause us mild discomfort could trigger catastrophic epidemics on North Sentinel. History proves this repeatedly. Contact with isolated populations often leads to demographic collapse. The Jarawa population crashed after contact. The great Andamanese, who once numbered thousands, dwindled to barely 50. The Anj tribe teeters on extinction. Dr. Thangaraj closes his laptop, the data glowing in the darkness. The best way to protect the Sentinelese genome, he knows, is to never collect it. The missionary's journey. John Allen Shaw grew up in Vancouver, Washington, the son of a Chinese-American psychiatrist. He attended Christian schools, went to Oral Roberts University, and by his early 20s had fully embraced evangelical missionary culture. But unlike his more cautious father, John possessed a romantic's heart and an adventurous restlessness. He wasn't always fixated on North Sentinel. Initially, he trained with All Nations, a missionary organization in Kansas, preparing for work in more accessible regions. But somewhere along the way, he discovered the Joshua Project, a database cataloging unreached people groups who haven't heard the Christian gospel. The Sentinelese entry consumed him. Here was the ultimate challenge. A tribe so isolated that no one even knew what they called themselves, speaking a language no outsider could comprehend, actively hostile to contact. To evangelical Christianity, they represented souls in darkness. To John, they represented something more, a quest, a calling, perhaps even destiny. His journals reveal a young man wrestling with grand ambitions and genuine faith. He wrote about wanting to bring eternal life to the Sentinelese, but also about adventure, about being remembered, about accomplishing something significant. He studied linguistics, learned survival skills, practiced kayaking obsessively. His parents were skeptical. His father particularly worried about John's increasingly obsessive focus. Friends from college remember him as enthusiastic but sometimes naive, convinced of his special calling. John funded his mission through odd jobs and donations from church networks. He contacted linguists, anthropologists, anyone with knowledge about isolated tribes. Most warned him off. A few, perhaps unwittingly, provided information that helped him plan. By 2018, John was ready to risk everything for a people who had never asked for salvation. The colonial shadow. Maurice Vidal Portman arrived in the Andaman Islands in 1879 as a young British naval officer. Educated, ambitious, and fascinated by what the British called primitive peoples, he saw his posting as an opportunity for scientific advancement and personal glory. Portman styled himself an anthropologist, though his methods would be considered criminal today. He measured skulls, documented tattoos, collected artifacts, and compiled extensive notes on Sentinelese tribes. His photographs show native people posed like specimens, their dignity stripped away by the camera's colonial gaze. But Portman's greatest obsession was the Sentinelese. Multiple expeditions to North Sentinel failed, the inhabitants fled into the jungle or shot arrows from the tree line. Portman grew increasingly determined to make contact, to be the first white man to discover them. In January 1880, he finally succeeded, though not in the way he hoped. His armed expedition captured 6 Sentinelese, an elderly couple and 4 children. Portman took them to Port Blair, the colonial capital, where he housed them in his residence for study. Within days, the elderly couple fell ill and died, likely from diseases their immune systems couldn't fight. The 4 surviving children were sent back to North Sentinel, loaded with gifts, their bodies potentially carrying the very pathogens that killed their elders. Portman later admitted his expedition likely doomed future contact attempts. But he never acknowledged the deeper crime, the trauma inflicted on those children, the deaths of their guardians, the message sent to an isolated community that outsiders brought only violence and death. The Sentinelese remembered. They always remember, the practice village. Somewhere in the Kansas countryside, a bizarre scene unfolds. John kneels in dirt, blindfolded, hands tied behind his back. Around him, people shout in fabricated languages nonsense syllables meant to simulate the incomprehensible. Someone prods him with a stick. This is training. All Nations runs these simulations to prepare missionaries for hostile environments. The village is staffed by volunteers who role-play as aggressive natives. They threaten, they mock, they test a missionary's resolve. The goal is psychological preparation. Can you maintain your faith and composure when faced with rejection, hostility, potential violence? John throws himself into these exercises. While other trainees might see them as somewhat silly grown adults playing pretend, John treats them with absolute seriousness. This is his proving ground. If he can't handle fake spears in Kansas, how will he handle real arrows on North Sentinel? The training includes language acquisition techniques for environments where no interpreters exist, survival skills for jungle environments, first aid, and importantly, theological preparation for the moment of martyrdom. All Nations doesn't explicitly encourage missionaries to die for their faith, but they certainly frame it as the ultimate act of devotion. John practices gift-giving protocols learned from historical contact attempts with other tribes. Fish are supposedly universal peace offerings. He learns basic medicinal practices. He studies every scrap of information about the Sentinelese, grainy photographs, decades-old anthropological reports, second-hand accounts from neighboring tribes. What the training doesn't include is ethics. No one asks whether these isolated people have the right to refuse contact. No one questions whether spreading Christianity justifies the risk not just to the missionary, but to the tribe itself. John graduates from all nations convinced he's prepared for anything. He's wrong. The failed encounters. History shows the Sentinelese have been remarkably consistent. Outsiders are not welcome. In 1974, a National Geographic film crew approached the island, hoping to capture first contact on camera. Director Bob Panwar led the expedition with anthropologist T.N. Pandit. As their boat neared shore, Sentinelese warriors emerged from the forest, gesturing aggressively, clearly ordering them away. The crew continued approaching. Arrows flew. One struck the director in his thigh, lodging deep enough to require surgical removal. The team retreated, their footage showing hostile silhouettes against white sand, the closest the world had come to meeting the Sentinelese on film. 7 years later, the cargo ship MV Primrose ran aground on North Sentinel's reef during a storm. The crew initially felt relieved to see land until they realized where they were. Through binoculars, they watched Sentinelese warriors gathering on the beach, constructing boats, clearly preparing to board the stranded vessel. The crew sent desperate radio messages. Wild men estimate more than 50 carrying various homemade weapons. Crew members' lives not guaranteed. They armed themselves with flare guns and fire axes. For several days, they maintained defensive positions while tropical weather prevented rescue helicopters from reaching them. The Sentinelese never actually boarded, perhaps deterred by the ship's height, perhaps simply making their point clear. Eventually, the crew was evacuated by helicopter. The Primrose remains there today, a rusting monument to human miscalculation, slowly being consumed by the reef. In the 1990s, Indian anthropologist Madhumala Chattopadhyay led several peaceful contact expeditions, even managing brief exchanges of coconuts. But these encounters raised more concerns than they resolved. Each gift carried invisible dangers. Each friendly gesture risked catastrophic disease transmission. The final crossing. November 16, 2018. John makes his final journal entry by flashlight in a rocking boat. The previous day ended in chaos. He paddled to shore, singing hymns, throwing wrapped fish as gifts. The Sentinelese responded with arrows. One allegedly pierced his waterproof Bible, a miracle, he wrote, a sign from God to continue. He fled back to the fisherman's boat, leaving behind crucial supplies including his passport. Any rational person would recognize this as a clear message: you are not wanted here. The Sentinelese literally shot at him. But John interprets it differently. The pierced Bible isn't a warning, it's divine protection proving he should persist. That night, he writes what will become his last words. You guys might think I'm crazy in all this, but I think it's worth it to declare Jesus to these people. Please do not be angry at them or at God if I get killed. He adds a crucial instruction: don't retrieve my body. The next morning before dawn, John tells the fishermen to leave without him. This time there will be no retreat. He strips down to his underwear, a gesture of vulnerability he hopes will communicate peaceful intentions. Then he begins swimming toward shore, leaving the boat behind. What happens next is unknown. The fishermen, watching from a distance, report seeing him reach the beach. Hours pass. When they return the following day to look for him, they witness something that will make international news. A group of Sentinelese emerge from the jungle, dragging a body across the sand. John Allen Shaw is dead at 26. The aftermath. John's death ignited fierce global debate. Was he a martyr or a fool? A faithful servant or a reckless colonizer? His father, Dr. Patrick Shaw, broke his silence with unexpected criticism. In emails to journalists, he blamed evangelical Christianity, the opium of the masses, he called it, for indoctrinating his son with dangerous delusions. The missionary organizations that trained John responded by lionizing him, calling his death the privilege of sharing the gospel. Indian authorities faced a dilemma. Legally, John's killers committed murder, but prosecuting them would require contact, which would risk the tribe's health and violate India's protection policies. More practically, how do you arrest people whose language no one speaks, who live on a legally restricted island? The fishermen who took John faced charges. It violated the protected area permit regulations that make visiting North Sentinel illegal. But even they were portrayed sympathetically. John had bribed them, exploited their economic desperation. Within weeks, a different American tried visiting the island, this time leaving a Diet Coke can as a peace offering before getting arrested. North Sentinel had become a morbid internet challenge, a forbidden zone that attracted precisely the wrong kind of attention. Anthropologists use John Jeff's death to reinforce what they'd been saying for decades. The Sentinelese have made their choice clear. They've rejected contact repeatedly, violently, consistently. That's not hostility, it's sovereignty. The best protection we can offer them is absence. No missions, no documentaries, no contact attempts. Let them exist in their isolation, not because they're primitive or dangerous, but because it's their right. Some doors should stay closed. Some people should be left alone. The Sentinelese never asked to be saved.